Hi, everyone. Welcome to our DASER online experiments. I'm J.D. Tilosic, and I'm the Director of Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences. This year marks the beginning of our 10th anniversary of DASER, which stands for DC Art Science Evening Rendezvous. And I'd like to thank all of you for your continued support over the years of this series of cross-disciplinary salons. Now, during the pandemic, we have taken this salon online. Although we are based in Washington, D.C., our virtual audience has expanded to include over 20 different countries. So welcome to everyone. And be sure to view our past DASER experiments online at CPNAS YouTube. DASER was developed with the intent of bringing people from different communities into conversation to foster a general spirit of collaboration and integrative thinking. How can different disciplines inform one another? Can this lead to innovative ideals that could impact science and the arts as well as society? Because benefiting society through science and evidence is part and parcel of the work of the National Academy of Sciences. DASER provides a platform for discussion around these topics that are important to all of us, not just as scientists or artists, but as citizens. So today we begin a three-part series called The Evolution of Studio K.O.S. K.O.S, which stands for Kids of Survival, is a group that started in the 80s as an after-school art program for marginalized students in the Bronx. It was under the direction of the late Tim Rollins. This program was transformative in many ways, not only because of the artwork that they produced, but the way that the art practice transformed the way that students thought about their own education and about society and their own lives. Today, we're joined by 4 of the original members of the collaborative who will tell you in their own words their story and how they are carrying on the traditions of Tim Rollins and the K.O.S. But before we begin, a few logistics. The first part of today's program, as you will see, is pre-recorded. But while you're watching it, our guests are present in the virtual green room and can begin taking questions. So as questions might come up, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We will all come on after the video to continue in real time. We are also going to use the chat function in the Zoom, also located at the bottom of your screen, for what we call community share. When we hosted DASERS Live, we would ask anyone who had any cross-disciplinary work that they wanted to share with the community to take the mic for 30 seconds and to introduce themselves and to share. And today we're going to use the chat function to do that as well. So please introduce yourself. So to recap, Q&A for questions and chat for community share. So let's get started. Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences is proud to present The Evolution of Studio K.O.S.
Studio K.O.S, formerly Tim Rollins and K.O.S, is a after-school program that grew into an art collective in which we produce collaborative works based on works of literature.
K.O.S has always been about possibility. It's always been about transcendence. It's always been about not accepting things that are handed down to you. It's about making sure that your voice is heard.
I am a kid of survival, and being a part of K.O.S, I learned everyone is an artist, or can be, if they are willing to do the hard work and pursue it with consistency.
K.O.S is individual voices that combine together become a harmonious chorus to send a message and a song for everyone to enjoy and hear. My name is Rick Savinon.
My name is Jorge Abreu.
Robert Branch.
Angel Abreu, and I am from the Bronx, New York.
South Bronx, born and raised.
Bronx, New York.
It's a great breeding ground for artists.
Tim was certainly not he wasn't a missionary, but he was definitely on a mission, as he talked about several times throughout the years. And on that mission, he most certainly touched my life in such a profound way. I can't say that he pulled me out of the gutters like people might want to think. That's certainly not the case. But what he did was show me possibilities.
Tim's a wonderful human being, mentor, and friend. When I met Tim, I was a teenager who was struggling with dyslexia, on the verge of dropping out of school. And through Tim's mentorship, I was able to graduate high school, attend college on a full tuition scholarship, and eventually go on to graduate school, and most importantly, make works of arts that have deep impact for me personally and to the community that I live in.
The way that he teaches is by pulling back like a sliver of the veil to get that interest in us sparked, the curiosity, and he'd do it in such a clever way that he'd make us discover what he wanted us to the entire time, but he'd make us think that it was more our doing than it was sort of his. And I think that's remarkable, you know. And if you can do that, if you can spark that interest and that curiosity in anyone, there are endless opportunities. And I'm a kid of survival. And being a part of KOS, you know, I learned that everyone is an artist, or you can be, you know, if you're willing to do that hard work. And maybe I'm repeating myself, but I truly think that is the essence of what Tim gave to us as a human being and as an artist, educator, mentor, father, and ultimately a friend, because that's really what sparked the greatness that we've become together.
There was a certain moment, and I've talked about this several times before, but there was a certain moment in my membership with KOS that were pretty transcendent. One in particular was Tim encouraged me to read philosophy, and he saw in me a hunger for that. And I started actually reading W.E.B. Du Bois. I came across a line in W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk that said, where W.E.B. Du Bois says, "I sit by Shakespeare and he winces not." And I remember reading that same line over and over until it hit me that these things were written for us just as much as anyone else. That I could bring my experience as a Dominican American. It's just as valid to collaborate with someone like Shakespeare, and to then in that collaboration make intersections that are just as valid as anyone else's, be it some Ivy League student, be it some comparative literature student somewhere that's dissecting these things. And that lesson has been with me ever since.
What I realized about the 35 years in KOS is that we've always evolved. We've always we've always accepted change as part of our evolution and never looked back, right? I love that at certain points within current events during our timeline, we would send a message through our paintings in protest about what was occurring during those times. The South Bronx during the 1980s, it was abandoned, and because of what different groups within the South Bronx were doing as KOS, were emerging with, positive reaction that the South Bronx was changed. So the transition it had to happen that way. And so we realized that during the protests and during these times and Black Lives Matter, that we had to go digital. The transition, it was very natural for us because the fluidity has always been there and will always be there. And that's part of what KOS does. When we do these workshops, we're not only teaching history, we're not only teaching text or creating work, we're asking our audience member to take that information, right, and to create their own works. So our messages, their messages, and their messages beyond will always evolve.
We're able to transition to digital, transition to working through a pandemic, but not lose any of the integrity that we had developed as visual artists working in a physical space, that we were able to kind of take on these new tools, these new events, and incorporate them into our long-term vision of creating works that are allegorical and deeply important to our community and to ourselves as a group.
I'm going to be completely honest. I have to say that when Tim passed away, I was, and I know this is true for all my KOS brothers here, but I was completely broken. I mean, utterly, completely destroyed. We knew we had to continue. Now, only because there's the notion, and this is when we were making work, where we talk about the text choosing us. This work chooses us. We continue because we have no choice. Now, again, I'm not a fatalist at all, but we really have no choice. And the fact that we had someone as profoundly life-changing as Tim was to all of us and continues to be, solidified that notion that we just had to continue.
Tim's death was a surprise. He was, we believed he was in good health, and but we always knew that people, what we're doing here, when we make our work, we often unearth these histories and these connections that we have to other art, to other working models. And what we do here is very similar to what was done in Rembrandt's workshop and in other places. And when you look at other forms of art, there are lots of collaborative and collective practices that make work. And we knew that this model had viability long term. We actually would talk to Tim often about that people will someday recognize how universal the things are that we do here. We've taken this opportunity to go digital with our practice. When we first did the Invisible Man workshop, we had an opportunity to kind of reframe what we've always done in real space together as a group, and kind of use the affordances of the internet and technology to kind of continue to be in the same space and create a new digital space to collaborate with teachers, scholars, educators. The changes that happened during the pandemic in terms of bringing up some of the fissures that we have around race in our country has really made us very interested in exploring a lot of the works that we've done on African American authors. And we're really looking forward to continuing to investigate that work through this digital format. And it really is terrific that now we can, that we can connect with communities and still be in our own and create these dialogues across great spaces, but also talk about how important these themes are to our current cultural climate. So it's been invigorating to be able to talk to a teenager or an educator in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who's struggling with how to, how do we teach, how do we make art in response to the tragedy and the loss of life that we've experienced through the public murder of George Floyd, and being able to kind of dissect that and be able to kind of retrofit our pedagogy in a way that seems really natural has been really interesting, and we're looking forward to continuing to go down that path.
It didn't make sense for us to make the same things that we're making that we collaborated with Tim, and so all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and as Robert eloquently said, we got pushed into this new digital era where it became obvious that what we had to do is actually take those themes and transform them and reevaluate and remake under this paradigm shift that we were faced with. And so what you asked the question, what are we doing? We have a wealth of work to look back on the tap, that not only will we have these physical manifestations, whether they be digital or analog, but we'll be able to reinterpret these themes and reevaluate the pedagogical lessons that we learned and that we want to push forward as we move through and develop our own practice post-Tim.
Figuring out how we can kind of repatriate these spaces for communities that don't have access to them. That's always a very important part of our, important part of our practice, is that, we care very much about access. And so while we're very excited about working with students who are online and taking in and commenting and criticizing, and of course, creating aspirational motifs around this time, we're also worried about those students who don't have an opportunity, and teachers who don't have an opportunity to use these digital spaces.
The whole digital realm has sort of opened up our worlds. Now we're not only thinking about just making visual art, but we're looking into sound as well. We're looking into different forms of art.
Under the Studio K.O.S. Moniker, which is a natural evolution of Tim Rollins and K.O.S., we plan to work with different communities, continue to create new spaces and new materials to explore what it means to make art collectively, and to make work that is kind of an embodiment of democracy.
There's been that amalgamation of science and art that actually has gone back. We can go way back in time where those collaborative efforts have always been there. I mean, we can go back to Da Vinci. There's a huge influence of our practice. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the German poet, who was also a botanist and wrote several books on botany and color theory, and that's dating back to the 1700s. So there's a long history of science and art being meshed together. Science in a lot of ways has been boxed into this whole notion that there is not a lot of creativity, that it's all just based on fact. But the fact is, to get to those real truths, you have to think outside the box. You have to have the notion, and also, I'll go further, you have to have a sense of humor. You have to have some comedic interpretation of certain things that you experience every day. You can't take one without the other. And anyone that argues against that, I think, is being foolish.
I think that notion of the pursuit of truth it's a very strong bond between artists and scientists. And one of the when we look at our lineage as an art collective, we have this kind of, we really are kind of conceptual painters, and it's a conceptual practice. And we look at people like Duchamp, who were engineers before they decided to be, who was an engineer before he decided to become an artist. And we just see a lot of connection in that pursuit of truth in the sciences, in which you kind of continue to experiment and verify and reflect and ideate. That is a very parallel process to what we do in the visual arts, in which you kind of create things, see if they work, test, make different, and control for different things. So that's a very powerful. The practices are very similar. The outcomes can be different. But if you speak to an artist, you'll also notice, or a scientist for that matter, you'll see that passion and that pursuit of an idea is very important. It's very important to these practices. And so we've always gained inspiration from looking at scientists and how they pursue their work, and kind of seeing ourselves to that kind of same mirror of experimenting and doing the kind of exploration, research, and scholarship to make our works of art.
Science and art are they're just kind of human attempts to understand and describe what the world is around us. And both artists and scientists, we strive to see the world in different ways, new ways, in order to communicate our vision. So when I look at science and artists, scientists experiment, so do artists do. They both do experimentation in order to get to a cause or a cure. Science, because of their experimentation, they allow artists to manipulate their materials in order to create a new vision for science to engage in, right? So it's like a revolving door in a sense. And that's why I've always been a science buff and an artist, because of my love through comic books as well. You have this talented person who draws and illustrates what science is trying to tell you, right? And it just blends together so beautifully in a way. And so they coerce each other, so it's one of those things where I feel like science and art, they can't live without each other.
Rick, you said that it's the science and art are these kind of fundamental human endeavors. There's been interesting new research that shows that that the cave paintings, that the ochre that they used to make those cave drawings in Lascaux and other places were also what they used to start fire. So it's just like that kind of Promethean spark, right? Fire at that period of time was the height of technology, and it was also what was used to create art. And again, you see that kind of duality between science and art at the very earliest points of our civilization and humanity. That it's one of these kind of fundamental forms that belong to us as a species.
Those cave paintings, you think about this, and as much as I loathe some of the solipsism from Descartesian philosophy, the whole point to say that I think, therefore I am, people have been, this is the kernel of the strife for knowledge that has happened since the beginning of time. And those things are hand in hand. They go hand, art and science they're just wrapped around each other like two vines, just because of survival and what you need to be, survival existence. You must think to be.
We had the opportunity to make the work for the Academy of Science. And Tim and I sat down and we started jamming and creating ideas or talking about ideas about Darwin. And in the book, there is a original drawing of the tree of life that Darwin actually drew. And it's a tree that it starts from one stem and it branches out. And his conclusion was, when he was in the Galapagos Islands, he viewed certain species that because of their environment, they actually mutated. It was the mutations that actually survived the areas that they lived. So as there are certain hummingbirds that have long beaks, and the reason they have long beaks is through evolution, is because they can reach the nectar of a certain flower that lives in their environment. Now those other species actually died out, or they ventured to other environments to survive. So in thinking of that, I thought of, like intersecting taking Darwin's original drawing and making a copy upon copy upon copy. And because the beauty of Photoshop and technology that we have, I was able to do that. So we took the original drawing and we just cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste until it became a web. And it looked like, it not only resembled a web, but it looked like DNA strand, right? Then we started venturing into science, DNA strands, and then from DNA, from the smallest molecules to the vast oceans of the universe.
You talked about the theme of Darwin and adaptation as part of natural selection. And I think that that's one of the things that I love about the Darwin painting. First, I always remember the enthusiasm when Tim said, we figured it out. I think we could do this as a stamp. That way we can kind of reproduce the image. But I think that also very much ties into something that we've been searching for in our art for a very long time, is that we've been trying to kind of create these visuals that kind of reflect our conceptual practice. So we've always been kind of moving towards this kind of minimal visual in which you can't see where one hand starts and the other one begins. We want to kind of create these paintings that are an allegory for our collaborative process. And I feel the Darwin painting, our last iteration of it, really did that quite beautifully, because we sort of know how we kind of handle the stamp, but it's when it comes together visually, all you see is the web and the interlinking, and that interlinking that connotes both a cosmos and the tree of life also has a strong connection to some of the people that some of the abstract expressionists whose work we're inspired by, like Jackson Pollock and others, Jack Whitten. So it's this kind of, we're really proud of that painting, because that painting kind of expresses something that we've been searching for as artists, and then has a deep connection to the ideas that Darwin espoused. So I think it's really terrific.
Tim always talked about soul, right? And people having soul and tapping into that. It not remiss to add that we actually, the real good rendition of that painting came when we collaborated with Darwin at his actual library, where he wrote The Origin of a Species, where he drew the Tree of Life in his library at the University of Edinburgh. And we sat in that room, we sat in that space, and Darwin sat there with us. He did. Just as we collaborate with all the authors and composers that we choose, that both we choose to work with and that choose to work with us. And so the fact that these mutations then, in a way, there is no coincidence, is what I've come to find out. There really is none. And the fact that that body of work came at a time when we were, as a group, going to have to face our own questions on evolution, on how we would evolve as a group, how we would transform and transcend. It became a visual, as Robert says, a visual allegory for the strife that the kids of survival continue to go through. And we look at those paintings so kindly because those mutations, those abstracted manifestations are symbols of our strife, they represent everything that we've gone through. And again, we collaborate with Darwin and connect and make those connections because we're all human. We all put our pants together one leg at a time. And Darwin faced the same tribulations that we did and that we continue to do.
In our project, one of our first and very important paintings was about Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. We later on, one of the first digital works we made about 20 years ago, Decentralized Arts, was a website, and we actually explored the actual Prometheus text. But I think to get to the core of what we're talking about here is that when we look at the myth of Prometheus, is that he brings down the sparks of that spark. And then it is facilitated, it is fanned, and it grows into something much larger. And I think that's a very important thing to take away from both education and science, is that you can have a spark, but you also have to create the ingredients, the environment, whether that's a democratic organization or society, or that is a society that listens to reason, where that spark can grow and can be fanned and can be expressed and can be taken by others. That was the true power of the Promethean ideal, was this sort of like that the spark grew into a great raging flame that would then, supersede the gods. And similarly, when it comes to the creation of art and science, that we need facilitators and we need spaces in which ideas can grow. And we need systems that support dialogue and conversation. And that is the Promethean. I think that is one of the Promethean ideals that we should bring into practice. And I'm not surprised that at a place devoted to science, that it would be in all the nooks and crannies of the building, because that's a very important and powerful idea. It's not enough to have an idea, but you have to be committed to letting that idea grow and making sure that you're doing justice to it at all walks, at all points. And I think that's one of the brilliance that Tim brought into his art and pedagogy, that he really saw himself as a facilitator and a conveyor of a space for which these ideas could grow and become greater than the sum of its parts.
Okay, hello everybody. This is JD Talasic. I'm so glad to welcome everybody from the DASER community, both the DC region and around the world. And thank you to everyone in Studio K.O.S, Robert, Angel, Jorge, and Rick. It's so incredibly special to have you here with us today and to share this evolution of Studio K.O.S. I'd like to just start us off by asking to maybe expand a little bit more on the sort of the transition from Tim Rollins and the K.O.S to Studio K.O.S. You talked about it a bit in the video that we just saw, but what are the challenges, and just also what are your priorities moving forward?
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you JD and the Academy of Science. Sounds like I'm receiving the Academy Award of some sort. But it's been almost 3 years that Robert, George, Angel, and I have sat down and started to think about moving forward, what we wanted to do, and talk about science influencing art. Once the pandemic hit, we thought that we were going to physically start doing these workshops, which we would usually do with Tim at universities and museums abroad. But we had to change the dynamic of how we were going to teach the books that we were reading, the ideas that we had, how were they going to manifest properly the way they always would throughout this 30 plus year span. And so we started to think of digital, of combining technology. And we thought that that would be the best way. So sitting down and having long Zoom meetings after Zoom meetings, which everyone can recognize now as the new norm, we came up with this concept that we could do this, and also develop the concept into other workshops that we can do abroad in order to combine the elements that we were using for each of the workshops. And in this in particular, we were using Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man.
Is there anything else that the rest of you would like to add?
Yeah, no, I'd like to say, and thank you again for everyone for taking time from their busy days to join us here. Yeah, you know, just to add to what Rick just said, what we set out to do was to look at some of the works that we had explored previously with Tim, but because we were forced into this, as mentioned in the video, this paradigm shift that I think no one anticipated, right? And all of a sudden it became extremely important for us to be able to look back and look at some of these works through this new prism. And then we got to see these things in ways that, again, we didn't anticipate, but we thought was incredibly important. We didn't know how we were going to go about doing this, honestly. The four of us had, I mean, an amazing number of meetings trying to figure out, just talking things through, what is really important for us as a group, what is our message. And it starting with our exhibition at Lehman Maupin named Workshop, that's what we decided, you know, that's the essence of our collaboration. It's the workshop. It's about community. It's about bringing people together in a way where nothing, by the way, I mean, we've got certain protocols with these workshops that we have in place, but we didn't know exactly what was going to happen in these things. What we did know was that we're going to make museum quality work, right? So there's a high level of, we didn't ever want to condescend anyone. We ask for the best from all of our participants and from us. And in that coming together, the intersections that are made are just so wonderful and not anticipated, right? Because life would be incredibly boring if we knew exactly what was going to happen and our plans just went along as we had planned. But we're just, you know, JD, we're saying yes more than no. That's what we're doing.
Wonderful, wonderful. We have some questions coming in, so I'd like to kind of introduce some other thoughts. There's a paraphrase. I'm going to paraphrase several that I've seen and ask the question of, you know, because your art practice and based in sort of a art education process. We're also, you know, DASER is about discussing things across discipline. And I'm just kind of wondering, what advice would you give to an educator within the science, or you know, just educators in general? I'm wondering how these different areas of educations and specialization can inform one another, and what advice you might give to a practitioner.
I think one of the base is to embrace pedagogy of exploration and inquiry. I think that's what we have in common as artists and scientists, is that we don't know where we're going to start, but we have a framework for development and exploration. And that is really the pedagogy as you know, one of the core pillars of Studio K.O.S. and our knowledge workshop is that we would, you know, we have a question that we want to answer, and then we'd start exploring it, and then we would, you know, come in and check. So very much like a scientist has a hypothesis, and then they create experiments and they test. And sort of, if you're willing to look at education as an experience or art as an experience, then you don't really need a lot of materials. What you need is a space and a community willing to kind of come together under kind of these ground rules and making sure that you document. In the case of art, you do this by making artwork, your process, and that's quite powerful.
I'd also like to add, we're all educators here, right? So we all teach as well, and so glad for all the educators that are here in the with us. It's so vitally important, the work that you all do. But I told my students that there is, I think, a synergy between the idea making between how scientists work, comedians, and artists, right? And I really truly believe this, because you have to have some sort of sense of humor, right, to come up with some of these things. And then especially with art, and this is when I'm talking to my art students, you've got to put in the research, right? It's not like let's just paint pretty pictures and that's perfectly fine, right? But if you want to actually if you want to transcend and mesh and make real progress, I think thinking about just having a sense of humor and then putting in the time to do that research and to come up with a hypothesis and make sure that you test it vigorously, excuse me. That's a good starting point.
Good. Thank you. Again, I'm going to try to paraphrase a few questions.
I want to add that you also have to be willing to embrace failure, because you learn so much. One of the things that, when we go to museums, we see these finished works of art. We don't see all the things that didn't work or all the experiments that led up to this. And it's really important to think about that as you kind of build your pedagogy and practice, that there are going to be roads not taken that will inform this practice. Right now we're sitting on the verge of a kind of what people like to call science miracle with these vaccines, but as if they were done in 18 months, but no, they're actually built on science that took 10, 20 years to develop, and lots of mistakes and errors and late nights. But if you can if you're willing to kind of accept some mistakes and learn from them, that you can do amazing things.
Great point, Robert. Rick, did you want to add something?
Well, I just wanted to say that we often say in the studio that some of the best work is where in the garbage can of an artist, right? So you can probably say that the same about a scientist or someone who is teaching science. Because I feel artists in science, we like to deconstruct things in order to create something within our new vision, right? To show folks. And art it's kind of like the language that everyone can speak to. If someone's frustrated, I remember when I went to the city at school for high school, and you work for your credits. And I teamed up to get a science credit. I teamed up with the science teacher, and he had a group of Japanese kids who did not speak any English and had an interpreter. But at that time, the interpreter could not attend, so we were kind of lost. And I said, "What do you want to? What is your message to them?" And he told me, "Well, I need for them to do certain things." And I said, "Perfect." I started drawing on the chalkboard. They all looked at each other and they were like, give me the thumbs up. And then, it was a language that we all spoke, and the class went great. And during that class, he realized that he started to combine. He wanted me there more often, because he wanted to combine art and science together. He thought it was like a perfect mesh.
That's great. So I guess a couple, like Michael has asked a question from the audience. Has KOS ever thought of producing a text on best practices for instructing and facilitating? And I know that there's been several texts over the years that have been written and created that Tim contributed to, and I'm sure you have as well. But I'm wondering if you could advise the audience on where they might look for the things that already exist, as well as any hopes that you as Studio K.O.S. would like to facilitate in the future. Any plans, hopes, dreams, aspirations?
Yeah, we're investigating all of those things. I think part of this process during the next year is really is in preparation for kind of doing some better documentation about what we do. But I also want to remind people that there are texts out there that already exist, that we've actually borrowed from to create our own practice. Dewey's Art as an Experience, the work of Dr. Martin Luther King in terms of organizing and creating activism and reaching community, Paulo Freire. So we look forward to kind of at some point kind of aggregating these experiences for this current age, but we also want to find that there's a lot of great work out there. Henry Giroux, who are practitioners, artists, scientists, and teachers who have this really wonderful frameworks for teaching and making an art and practice. And I also feel that pedagogy is like a pair of glasses. It's like, you have to find the right one. There's no, so you just gotta try them on. And it's not about reading one book, it's about reading several and making your own, making something that fits for you.
Yeah, and to add to sort of what Robert was saying about science and art and how you have to make so many mistakes and almost be willing to make those mistakes to really find where you fit in. I think to have, I guess, a sort of clear and laid out blueprint is ideal, but that's unfortunately that's just not how this world works, right? But yeah, that's what I would say. Not to be afraid to make mistakes and to obviously do all the research on all those great authors that Robert mentioned, and to make the best version of to make the best version that fits yourself and what you're doing.
Well, I also wanted to add that along, and actually, I smile at the fact that we could sit somewhere and figure out a blueprint. That would be fantastic. But we've always been about action, right? And we've taken certain examples throughout history, through literature and philosophy. Robert mentioned a couple of the pillars that our practice stands on. But further, we look at other examples like the Simon Bolivar Youth Orchestra in Venezuela. Just an unbelievable organization, and always been a huge influence for us. Again, the basic concept is just is mutual respect and no condescension. That's really where it's at. The material itself, it's almost, it doesn't really matter. If you can give youth real concrete respect, their opinion, build a platform for them to actually feel like they have a voice, it does wonders. One of the most important parts, and what keeps me going with this, is that light bulb that goes up over kids. You literally can see a light bulb when they realize, wait a second, the work that we just made can actually be in a museum. There's actual caption that says my name. This is how it really works. That's what keeps me coming back. I know a lot of the other guys, and so it's just taking action is all it is. We can't be afraid, again, to fail.
Thank you, guys. You kind of mentioned there was a question that came in about museum quality of works, and Carolyn Paz has asked us to kind of expand on that. Could you please talk more about what you mean when you say museum quality works, and talking about the workshops?
What we mean by that is, so we set up a system where we have basically what we know we want to get out of. I say that in quotation marks. Get out of a certain workshop, what we want to achieve. But because we truly believe that within this construct, you have no freedom without some sort of protocol, right? That's where the freedom really comes in. And then within that, those protocols, we leave room for accidents and things that then make us learn as educators, which I know all the educators here in this room can attest to. So we put the pressure on. I mean, we walk in, one of the first things we say to any group that we may be working with is like, hey, so we've got 5 days. We're here at the Museum of Modern Art, and we have to make a work that is going to be part of the collection here. No pressure, right? Kind of drop the mic and go from there. And I think once you set those bars, you set that bar really super high, it just then becomes one of these things where, you know, you meet those standards because you have to. It's just, you have no choice, right?
And JD, also, what we do is we create a foundation where there's no failure, right? People feel, and when we say that in our workshops, everyone kind of has like this sigh that is relieved from them, like, ah, okay, great. But then they're like, but we're gonna make history, and then people get really excited. And part of the lesson is that, you know, us as not just the students that we're conducting the workshops with are learning history, but we're learning from them as well, right? We're looking for something, a spark, like a Prometheus spark, something new for us to take along with us. So we're teaching and learning at the same time.
So I want to say that, you know, one of our like kind of artistic godfathers is the Art de Povera movement. And I think that scarcity, lack of resources is something that you should embrace, because that lack of material makes you focus on what you have, and you can take the materials of your life, your space, and you can turn them into something that speaks that speaks volume. And so, you know, when we say museum quality, that means is that we want to have an idea that resonates, and we want something that speaks truthfully to the materials that we're working with. Sometimes that's a number 2 pencil. Sometimes that's, in the past, has even been a piece of Wonder Bread. But the key is just sort of like, you want to approach your materials with integrity and respect, and then try to elevate them in a way that they speak to you and to your ancestors and to all the people who are going to come after us, who are going to look at that work. The reason we embrace working with museum and doing museum quality work, because we want our work to be eternal and to last forever.
I'm going to turn my video on for just a second, because Rebecca from the Tang has joined within the chat, and she's in the audience. And we were talking about books. The Tang Museum is really responsible for this MIT book, and it's just wonderful. So especially if you want to kind of look at the various collections and a little bit, and well, it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. I've had it sitting on my coffee table ever since we started working with the KOS again. You know, certainly the work that you did with the NAS, and then on Darwin's, on the nature, on the origin of species, it was, you know, that was sort of a collaboration with art and science. Some of the questions that are coming in now are specifically asking, and I'm going to combine some of them. Have you worked with, or do you plan on working in collaboration with scientists? And Rick just gave a wonderful story about working with a science teacher. So I'd be kind of curious as to what your thoughts might be as far as future endeavors. There's also one specific question is, have you considered doing anything on in relation to climate change? Which just to kind of entryway into that, people who may not really know your practice, is that your work always begins with a book or a piece of literature or music or something like that. So
and I think that's important.
I'll just let you talk about that for a second.
Yeah, the reason that we're kind of focused. We always start with a piece of text or literature, because we want to go on a journey, as we mentioned earlier, with our students, and we want to reframe conventional notions of what belongs to communities of color, and what texts in the canon truly mean. I think that we all know that when the forefathers of this nation wrote, "All men are created equal," they didn't include people who look like us. But those words were so powerful that people people like Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, W.B. Du Bois were able to bring truth to those words. And so, when we approach, works of the canon or music or classical music, the idea is, how can we take something of ourselves and make this truer and make this make a more universal experience and bring commonality. And, for those of us who recognize that climate change is an urgent issue, we recognize that too. It's not the space that we're working on, but I sort of feel like what we need to have in order to make progress in climate change, we need to have people recognize that this affects us all, and that, and try to find those kinds of truths. So we're always open to working with scientists. We have our kind of lens through which and tools with which we work with. But we do think that this has greater value. The idea of kind of trying to find these common spaces, repatriating work and reframing cultural and canonical texts.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, JD, I don't want to be too cute about this, but I think we all, with what happened this summer, and I'm gonna it's semantics, but I'm gonna switch it a little bit. But what more climate change do we need than what we experienced this summer when George Floyd was murdered, right? And we all witnessed this on TV. It's an amazing thing to be able to, as a country, as this entire planet saw that going on. And this is where we decided this, we already had a project that was supposed to be happening at the Walker Art Museum in Minneapolis. That was already planned. This is why I talk about where there is no coincidence. And all of a sudden, we all looked at each other and was like, this is what we need to do. This is the kind of change that we need to continue to perpetuate. And so, again, not to be too cute about climate change, but goodness, I mean, when we talk about social sciences and what Robert just so eloquently talked about with connecting with some of our African American authors that we've worked with through the years, and then again reevaluating those works and looking at them through this new prism, the new old prism, right? None of these things are really new. Go ahead, Rob.
And I would also say it's that we collaborated with Darwin, right? That's a scientist. That's how we we look at it, because obviously we think that there was something to say there in terms of Darwinism and reinterpreting what that meant and taking a look at that. And we do like to revisit themes throughout the year. That's part of the wonderfulness of being together for so long, is that when we come back to Darwin in a few years, maybe it is through a climate change framework. It just really depends on what we're feeling as a group and the communities that we're working with at the time.
And also our JD, also the work, if you look at some of the series of some of the works like The Invisible Man, Darwin, Malcolm X, they're always evolving, right? Because we as educators within the group are evolving as well throughout the years. So the work is always consistently changing and challenging us through current events.
I think that it's a good opportunity to plug the fact that this event, this DASER, is the first of 3 that we're going to do with Studio K.O.S. And next month, we're going to bring in a socio-medical scientist and historian, Samuel Roberts from Columbia University. And that will, I think, extend how we answer this question. I mean, I love Angel's little twist on the word climate change, because it certainly is an opportunity. This realm of talking about art and humanities is a wonderful place to look at these issues, not just from a science standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. How do these issues, whether it's climate change or health inequities, how do they affect us differently? And I think those are some of the ideals that we're going to explore over the next 2 months with Studio K.O.S, who has so gracefully and gratefully, we're grateful to you to accept this invitation to engage with us. And there was a question that I'm just going to throw out. Somebody was asking about the artwork that you did on the bricks. And I know that that's one topic that's going to come up next month. So I'm just going to leave a little cliffhanger. We're not going to answer that today, but if you want to know about the works done on bricks in burning areas of the South Bronx, please join us next month for DASER. Are there any closing comments or thoughts? I just, I want to end by just saying thank you. Thank you for Studio K.O.S, for the work you do. I think if from the comments that we've had, if you could hear applause, I think you would probably get a standing ovation from our audience for being here and for doing the work that you do. Any last words? Any closing comments?
Just wanted to say thank you. Yeah, thank you to everyone that attended today, and really fortunate that we're able. Studio K.O.S is able to do this.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for attending. I hope everyone got something from this. I was trying to type away as the dude was speaking, so sorry if I was so silent, but just trying to answer some questions as well.
And I think those of you who came, who people we've worked with in the past or communities we visit, we really are grateful to see you, and we love to see that these communities are still thriving and doing work, and thank you so much for checking in with us.
Right, and George Cecil from Contemporaries says thank you for honoring Tim's legacy, and indeed you're doing that as you move forward and create Studio K.O.S. So see you next month, guys.